Thank you very much for being here. This is our one of the alumni cafes of this year, and it will be the last one because we start again. I think it will be in September, but we will see. So we are like a few people here, but thank you very much for being here. As you know, this is like an initiative to know different professional experiences from our alumni in order to help and to just network within alumni, because I think it's a good opportunity. It is true that during that when these cafes take place, not a lot of people join, but once we add the cafe on our web, we know that not only alumni, but also people interested in the eBay community watch these videos, and some of them from time to time we get some questions or some queries concerning the presentations. So thank you very much also, Lluís, for being here today. He's our speaker, and he will be presenting his experience as a professional after being an eBay student. So I give you the floor.
Perfect. Berta, thank you very much for the invitation. It is a pleasure to be here. It is true that we are a small group, but I am sure that this is going to generate some conversations within eBay, and this is going to give some hints on potentially what can be done in the public affairs arena. This is a bit weird to be talking about myself, I have to say, but I'm gonna share my presentation to give you visibility of who I am, my path, and how I have capitalized what I have learned at eBay throughout my political and public affairs career. You asked me to present through a theme. I decided that would be doing it through the guiding thread, let's say, that has defined my professional career, which is divided, I would say, into essential parts: working in the public sector and in politics, and in the private sector doing public affairs. So this is the structure that I would like to follow in my presentation. I would give you a little bit of visibility of my professional path. I'm gonna make a point on the public sector, on the public affairs sector in Spain, then also go through the daily work at a public affairs consultancy or doing a public affairs in a corporation. And finally, I would be more than happy to answer to your questions and open up a discussion. So going through, let's say, the boring part, my career, as I was telling you, I worked in the public sector and in public affairs consultancy and doing public affairs in corporations. I studied political sciences in Pompeu Fabra in Barcelona. I graduated in 2009 with an exchange with the University of Toronto. Then after doing an internship at the Council of Europe and then volunteering in Nepal throughout that summer, I entered the Masters in International Relations at eBay. I graduated in 2011 with the specialization of international security. I don't know the people here in the forum, but I think that we all share an interest on what is going around us, on political affairs, in history, even in geopolitics, right? And that was the case. And I had this obsession for a while that I had to work in a multilateral organization / work in international affairs. And that would be from working at the European Commission, for example, going to the United Nations, right? After my master's, I did my internship in the European Institute of the Mediterranean, focused in Euro-Mediterranean policies. And I was given the opportunity to write about 17 East Asian countries in the yearbook from Enciclopedia Catalana, the Catalan encyclopedia. And that was a very nice experience to kind of like capitalize the analytical and systematical approach to international relations learned at the master's, and then being able to deliver, I would say, high quality content. But from that, I was saying that I was obsessed with that path because eventually I did not end up going to that way. I was given the opportunity to work at the European Commission as a trainee of the Blue Book. But in that very moment, I was also given the opportunity to work in the Catalan government as an advisor. And there was complicated times. And then life is about choices. And at that point, I decided that I was going to go for politics in my hometown. You know, I'm from Barcelona, and I was quite passionate about Catalan and Spanish politics at the time. So I said yes. And I worked as head of institutional relations and parliamentary affairs. I essentially wrote speeches. I was negotiating all the time with politicians, with MPs at the parliament. And I was also given an interesting opportunity to organize official trips from the cabinet, right? And I got that opportunity because of my education background, right? And that, for example, was an angle for me to try to like integrate my studies and my will to keep doing things related to multilateral organizations. We did stuff with the United Nations, with the COP21 in Paris, and we organized official trips to several countries. After that, I was an advisor in the Ministry of Culture after a break that I can tell you about later. And I ended up working again as head of institutional relations and parliamentary affairs in the business and knowledge department. After that, I worked in public affairs first in a public affairs consultancy firm called CREAP for 2 years. And then I've worked for the other two corporations, Uber, which you all know very well, and Ball, which is a packaging firm. Here, I'm just like putting you some pictures of these last years. Not only I was obsessed with international relations, but kind of like with something very idealistic that maybe some of us share, that you want to have like a contribution, positive contribution to the societies, the communities that you work with and operate in, right? I had that when I was working at the public sector. And when I was given the opportunity to work in the private sector, I also wanted to have that guiding thread, right? Of doing something, even if you're working for the interests of a company, that it is meaningful and that has actually a positive impact in the community. You'll see different pictures from these times, from the times we organized official meetings, for example, in this case with the Ministry of Environment of Morocco. And then you're going to see pictures on the right of more turbulent times. You have to be aware that I worked at the Catalan government when it was actually quite intense, like ramping up for the referendum of independence. And it was not easy. And also coming back to this idea of doing something that you are aligned with and that you feel that you have something meaningful to offer. I took some breaks from this experience. It was a bit scary at the time, of just like saying no sometimes and just like backing back if you did not agree, for example, with a political position. But that is what I did. In 2016, I traveled throughout South and Central America, and then Asia. And you're going to see this picture on the right that it ended up not really well. I had appendicitis in Myanmar with no hospitals, and it was quite bad. But eventually, I think that you capitalize these experiences for good, right? I have worked, as you were saying, at Uber, for example, and then I contributed, for example, to the public policy strategy in Spain to have a more, let's say, like democratic mobility field with the intervention not only of the taxi sector, but also BTCs, that they can compete in equal positions, right? And then throughout the pandemic, it was also very, very turbulent, but we had also the opportunity to collaborate with different NGOs to provide transportation alternatives in moments in which transportation was kind of like paralyzed. And finally, I've moved in the packaging sector. I am now working in a company. I do not know if I told you, Berta, in the beginning. I work in Ball Packaging, Ball Corporation, which is a company that is a global aluminum can producer for beverage. We are present throughout the world with a very strong hold in Europe. We have 24,000 workers, and we are essentially focused in delivering packaging that is less and less carbon intensive, right? We work for customers like these ones, so you just have an idea. And again, in this company, you also find the purpose of having a less carbon intensive activity, reducing the use of virgin aluminum, and actually having more aluminum that is recycled in the circuit. And that is my goal. I am the Southern Europe Public Affairs and Sustainability Manager, and I focus on that, on trying to deliver the necessary policies to get that and to actually attain 90% recycling rates plus, right? So this is the path. Public affairs, you know it very well. Traditionally, it was linked to your political leverage and the connections that you could have at the government to influence for your interests. In the case of Europe, it's been years that it has been really professionalized. And I would say that in Spain, we are a little bit more background in a way. You know, you still have this negative perception coming from public opinion. And I have to tell you that in the beginning, when I started working for public affairs, myself, I had this pejorative view of public affairs. But public affairs, it is wide, and again, it is all very systematized towards not only the interests of a company, but also, if it's done well, correctly, towards the interests of our citizens, right? You had this boom, especially from the pandemic, right? Companies have been going through uncertainty and turbulent times, and they have more and more relied on the public affairs advices that they can get from companies. It is something already regulated, very well regulated at European level. There is a transparency register that is actually voluntary. But for example, in Spain, we still do not have one. They are still working on one that can be actually regulating not only the presence, the meetings that the companies have with the different parliamentary groups and political stakeholders, but also giving visibility on the content and how those meetings are finally translated or not in potential amendments or differences in the content of one specific, not only initiative at a legislative level, but also, for example, on a parliamentary initiative such an oral or written question, right? So again, this is what I do at the moment, and since 2018, after working in the public sector. In this double activity that I like, this two-level activity, one being more analytical and strategic and systematic, and the other one very, very social, right? In my experience, having worked in the public sector not only gave you this, of course, deeper knowledge on how the political dynamics work, but also the political systems and the different regulatory layers, let's say. And yeah, at least in my case, working in a very turbulent time, but also being able to get along with a wide range of different stakeholders, because I was not only talking in that time to parties that were supporting independence, I was also talking and discussing and agreeing things with parties that were not aligned at all, right? And that, in my case, helped in the process of trying to find alliances with our customers when I worked in public affairs in the beginning, and of course in the 2 other corporations that I worked. It's all about making a stable network, but not only because you have contacts, but especially because you are able to build trust among those stakeholders, right? So this is my current company. For those of you who are not that familiar with public affairs, I always like to put it differently that a lot of people think of. Public affairs is not only engaging at a political level, right? And just like setting meetings with this and that person. It is especially something that you do, taking into account the different dimensions that we have, especially nowadays, that you are going to have to be credible, to be understood as a reliable partner, as a legitimate voice in the public conversation. And of course, you have to be reliable over time, right? So we have this classical view of approaching public affairs, which is, of course, engaging with this and that and stakeholder and having a strong narrative, but it is also being able to put those messages in the public agenda. And sometimes that goes beyond that political engagement. It is about working in reputation and trust, also having a solid engagement with the media on and off. You have to have a consistent relationship with key stakeholders in the media, not only when you're interested in being somewhere, for example, visible. You have to have this visibility on all the stakeholder mapping. You can do it through 2 different ways. I mean, for example, those who have had experience in the public sector, sometimes they work on their own, but in a lot of cases, it is also advisable to work with some specialized agencies. Actually, agencies that not only work with public affairs or communications, and then you have 2 separate, but agencies that see beyond that classical view on public affairs, which encompasses these 2 worlds. I don't think that there is nothing like just communications and classical communications and then lobbying. It is more than obvious that, of course, a government is not going to go into the direction that you are promoting if there is no kind of like a pressure from the media, right? When I'm talking about these things, I'm just trying to be as neutral as possible. I don't know if you have questions throughout the presentation, but I'm just being very, very raw in this sense. I mean, it is true that a lot of times maybe you find it very direct to be influencing in some topics on some others, but eventually it is also about making sure that you are doing it in a very transparent and let's say like careful stance, right? And very respectful with the procedures, of course, and yeah, with the cultural sensitivities. Then, of course, it is important to have a very positive relationship with the social stakeholders, from NGOs, to think tanks and other platforms. It is the case, for example, in my case now, working in the packaging sector. I think that it is particularly crucial to be aware on all the data that is produced in think tanks, and try to provide a voice to those stakeholders that would eventually maybe support and be an ally for you in that trip. I would also tell you that it is interesting and important, actually, to be confronting those ideas with those coming from other stakeholders that would not necessarily share those views, right? And that is important. and those campaigns and the advocacy campaigns that you would presumably just like think about them for NGOs or associations, why not? That is the part that maybe it is not negative at all that a company just steps up there and shows what they have to offer to public opinion and of course to the institutions. And finally, something that maybe we are not focusing on a normal basis, but it is important, is to try to like align internally and make employees feel that they are part of something desirable and shareable, and that they're willing to be advocates too for the strategic access that you are setting for the company, right? And again, this is the typical stakeholders that I would be engaging on a normal basis, from politicians and institutions, but NGOs, and then why not maybe also campaigns that target directly citizens and has a more like consumer type approach. And also, why not thinking about your own customers? I was showing my customers, for example, we're talking about brands like in Spain, the Mao, Dam, or then Coca-Cola or PepsiCo. You really need to align your strategic goals with theirs. There's going to be times that there won't be any alignment at all, and you need to be able to navigate those situations. But you always need to have clear what your strategic objectives are, and why not maybe see in your customers an ally. And that doesn't necessarily go with, for example, like generating turbulences because you don't want to lose a customer, right? You can operate on a normal basis and convene that you're going to be disagreeing at some point, right? And then, as I was mentioning, the media ecosystem and of opportunities. Here, I mapped to end up with this final slide. Agencies, if it is useful for some of you, in Spain, as I was telling you, there has been a boom in the sector, and there is, and I can give you proof of that, there is space for everyone. And I see most of these companies being quite well positioned. Of course, they're offering different services that are useful for specific things, for specific moments. The approach differs a little bit. Of course, we're not going to deep dive on the different options, but some of them are giving this very innovative approach and having this more fresh view on public affairs. And then I was also mapping some of the companies that would be interesting to engage at some point in Spain in different sectors. Of course, mobility, pharma, and then packaging and soft drinks, and for example, energy, or why not tobacco, and the banking and the ecosystem. So this is the key stakeholders that we can actually knock on the door at some point. There's a lot of things moving. You will see on LinkedIn that there's a lot of opportunities coming up all the time. And I think that this is a very good moment. It goes along on this process of professionalizing and having a regulatory framework for our activity. And at the same time, it is coupled with an interesting moment with the sector, because there is a lot of uncertainty, not only coming, of course, from the COVID times, but especially now with the geopolitical crisis that we have with the Ukraine war, right? So yeah, this was a little bit of my story, what I've been doing throughout these years, how my day looks like. And I don't know if that is interesting to anyone, but it was nice to share with you. And of course, if you have any questions or doubts, I am more than reachable on this email, and I would be happy to answer your questions. During some of the times that I felt uncertainty through my events, it was actually nice to be aware that there were people that you can actually contact and have guidance on your professional career. So yeah, thank you very much, and open to your questions. Thanks.